A new flavor for your ear. Epic Spotlight. Putting the spotlight on positive goings on the real people that have chosen a real path. The who's, the whys, and the hows are being shared.
And we're back, and we got another one. But before we get going, we got to take care of some housekeeping notes. Today's episode is sponsored by Epic Mortgage. Whether you're buying, refinancing, or investing, call Epic today. That's 708-905-5300. That's 708-905-5300. It's your dreams, your goals. Let's plan together. Now on with the show. Today we have Timalyn Bowens. She's the owner and lead accountant for Bowens Tax Solutions. Timalyn is a seasoned tax expert licensed by the IRS as an enrolled agent, which allows her to officially represent taxpayers before the IRS. She earned her accounting degree from Bellarmine University, where she also studied professional writing. Timalyn has brilliantly combined her passion for tax law and writing to educate both taxpayers and tax professionals nationwide. Through her podcast, Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens, and her blog, she provides valuable insights and guidance on navigating the complexities of tax law. Welcome, Timalyn.
Thank you, Dante. I'm happy to be here with you today.
Hey, I'm happy you coming in. So let's get into it. I was curious about this career. What really motivated you to start your own business? And can you break that down for us?
Yeah, sure. So I was one of those, very small ratio of people who went into college knowing what I wanted to do. So I knew from the beginning I wanted to be a business owner. I knew I wanted to be an accountant, but I had no interest in the world of tax. It's funny. So long story short, and I really will give the short version, I grew up as a PK. So for those that don't know, that's a pastor's kid. And I always tell people my dad essentially inherited this church, right? So when we first went there, we were a family of 5. And there was the founding pastor's wife, a son that brought her, another lady in her 80s, and her grandson. So as the church began to grow, you look back on life and there are adults that you thought were friends, but I realized that they really were helping split me and my brothers up so my parents could focus on and do stuff in the church. Well, as the church grew, there was somebody named Deacon Johnson, and he took me under his wing. And it's crazy because in elementary school, looking back, I knew how to use a ledger. So we would do attendance, we count the offering, and record everything every week in a ledger. And, once you start doing something, you just keep doing it. It's not a big deal. And he was like, what we're doing is important because if we get the money wrong, your dad won't have a church to preach in. So from a very early age, that stuck with me. And then I was able to take my first accounting class in high school that people are struggling with. And I'm like, oh, snap, this is a ledger. I already know how to do this. But I fell in love with it there. And I said, I want to do this to be able to help businesses stay in businesses or in business rather, because if their numbers are off, they'll close. Well, fast forward a little bit to college, and I graduated from Bellarmine University. Go Knights. Definitely best accounting program in this region. And they have it set up so that you take a semester off to do a full-time internship. I had no interest in tax. We're dealing with the 2008 recession while I'm in college. So essentially it's get in where you can fit in, right? So the firm that I worked with had just gone international that year. The openings were in the tax department. And when you work at a bigger firm, you either do tax or audit, which they call advising or what have you now, attestation. So I had to do tax. I was like, oh man, because within circles, we have the business school and the accountants are nerds, right? But then within the accounting circle, the tax people are really nerds. So I'm like, oh man, now I'm one of these tax nerds. But once I got in there, I fell in love with tax law because working with the bigger companies, you really see how it is complex, but it all fits together as a puzzle and tells somebody's financial story throughout the year. Again, at this time, had no idea what an enrolled agent was, but I was exposed to that by meeting somebody at random who had an issue with the IRS, and I'm telling colleagues and stuff about it. And I'll admit, initially I was a little arrogant. I was early 20s, making more than my age an hour by the time overtime hit, working 78 hours a week. And I'm like, well, all you have to do is like, you just call them and set up a plan. But it was at that moment that I realized there's a fear that people have of speaking with and dealing with the IRS. And then I had to sit back and say, if my family member was in that same situation, would they would known what to do? Would they have had the money to just say, well, all you have to do is, and that really like sat with me throughout my tenure with them. I did 3 busy seasons with them, and I felt that I could make the most impact with being that advocate to represent taxpayers before the IRS. And that is when I found the EA designation, and that is what I decided to pursue.
Man, that's a great story. I all I heard truly was you decode for people, for consumers, and that fear that people have, and they have honest fear because of what they don't know. I mean, the big book, that I probably never read, and all these codes, and this page, that page, and what is all these things, and if you're able to decode this information and put it into layman's terms, that will soothe the soul, and that's incredible what you do. Can you kind of explain the process? I mean, as an enrolled agent, you can help. Obviously, if we have a tax issue, can you explain like the steps that you go about to accomplish that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize because I probably should have broke down what an EA enrolled agent is. So that credential is actually the highest one that the IRS awards a tax professional. So we are one of 3 credentialed professionals that can represent clients before the IRS. So there's us, CPAs who are licensed through the state, and then tax attorneys who are also licensed through the state. So mine's a little bit different because directly through the IRS, I can represent clients in all 50 states and even U.S. taxpayers who are abroad, so expats as well. So with the tax representation piece, if you have a tax issue, as you mentioned, somebody to decode something, there's something called a 2848, which is a tax power of attorney. And when that is signed, let's say we have taxpayer A who comes to me, they really don't know how to communicate with the IRS. If I came on as the power of attorney, I begin to receive the notices, which I refer to as the IRS love letters, right? But then it gives me the authority to speak on their behalf on the phone. Now, to protect my clients and myself, I always check the box that I can't sign any return for them. So anything I submit, they can't come back and say, hey, I didn't agree to this. I'm like, yeah, I got your John Hancock right here. And I can't receive payments for them. But essentially, I am them. Like I'm stepping in their shoes and handling that situation for them. But it does also authorize me to do tax preparation, tax planning, consulting, and advising as well.
That's excellent. Now, obviously, with you're dealing with your clients, what are some common issues that you see people are facing nowadays?
So right now, it's crazy. As you said, seasoned tax professional earlier. I've been doing it long enough to see different phases and errors. Right now, we're still catching up from the pandemic. And the reason for that, like, yes, is it was horrible, shut down the IRS, and they're catching up. Right before COVID, we had the Tax Cut and Job Act, which was the biggest tax overhaul since, I believe, Reagan. All right. So we had that go into effect in 2018. So the taxes we filed in 2019 were the first tax year we really saw impacted by it. Then we all know what happened spring of 2020. So a lot of taxpayers are trying to wrap their head around these changes that they really didn't have time to adjust to because we only had 1 year under the new law, right? And then with 2020, we had different forms of tax relief with, like, we had the PPP loans, we had stimulus checks and all of those types of things. So when we had that tax overhaul, we had the tax rates change. We also had different credits extended, so the amounts were more. And then we had additional extensions of those with different COVID relief. So we have taxpayers who may have been like, let's say the 12% tax bracket. And what a lot of people don't realize is the next one is 22. That's a huge jump. So maybe you didn't financially struggle per se during the pandemic, but if you did have a pay increase and jump, you may not have known how to adjust your withholding during that time period to account for that huge jump, right? And then if we have all these different things coming at you during COVID and all the social media gurus who are telling everybody to get an LLC and S Corp, right? You're in a situation where you can't reach out directly to the IRS all the time because phone lines are down. You don't know who to trust. So it boils down to miseducation. And now how do we correct what's taken place? So it's kind of like a domino effect. Like you have people who are trying to be honest, right? And they just made some more money, but they don't know how to adjust if they need to make estimated tax payments, if they started that business, if they just, like I said, made more money earlier. Those are the two reasons really that I see people end up in trouble with the IRS. The people I work with are phenomenal at what they do if they're business owners. However, taxes aren't their thing. And that's fair because if taxes were their thing, they should be doing what I'm doing, right? Not what they do. So adjusting from having a W-2 where taxes are withheld to being self-employed, and now you're responsible for withholding Social Security, Medicare, you're responsible for withholding your taxes throughout the year. That miseducation right there can land somebody in tax trouble like that.
How often would you recommend someone wanting, or how often do you actually speak to your clients on a regular basis? Is there a month to month? Is it a quarterly check-in? I mean, how are we as consumers supposed to, really get ready for, like you say, these, windfalls and these downfalls, right? Windfalls meaning that we're making more money now, things are good in our industry, and it's like, oh wow. I'm making more money. Sometimes, like you said, people are not necessarily thinking about the tax liability to that.
Yeah, exactly. So that question, I would say that it does vary. What I found, and any business owners listening to this can probably get what I'm saying. Sometimes a client will hire you to do one thing, but they expect a plethora of other services. So it kind of throws you off with what you're doing. And I'll give the example earlier. I said I'm authorized to do tax preparation, planning, advising, and representation. So those are all different services and engagements. So what I found I could do to make that clear to clients in the engagement letters and then packages is offer a package like, okay, I will send out the fall updates. Here are a few things you can do to reduce your tax liability. But if you want an actual session where we look at your return specifically for preventative care and that tax planning, that's an additional cost because that's a separate engagement. It's a different service. So for my tax prep only, I would send them updates. I did a free webinar for my clients when we had that tax overhaul with TCJA, and then they could schedule appointments from there. But on average, outside of tax season, I'm reaching out about twice a year if they're just a tax prep client.
I really like how you broke that down. And I think we, as a consumer, I can put myself in that category. We don't know that those are separate items. We do make that assumption that you're going to do all this for us. And so when something, doesn't go the way we wanted to go, well, why didn't I know about this? Why didn't she tell me about this? But it is, we have to understand that these are separate businesses and underneath the same umbrella. And we need to ask you for that service because I think most people, we want to be proactive. I mean, and basically, for my journey, we have to be proactive because, man, that liability can be nasty. But let me ask you this question. So as far as dealing with the IRS, I mean, is it as simplistic as setting up a payment plan? Can you kind of break down just what does that look like on the back end? Hey, I have a liability. I owe this money. What is some of the communication that goes on to structure a plan that can work for, for the IRS and for the consumer?
That's a great question. It's funny because somebody in my mentor group just asked this. They're like, well, how do you handle a simple case and a complex case? I said, it's the exact same way. So within my firm, we have a 3-step process that we take everybody through. And I gave the example, I have a client who owed $24,000. It should have been super easy. 2 years later, I'm still dealing with that. And it's not because of the taxpayer or anything that I've done. What happened is we got caught in that whirl of COVID. So we have a tax return that's been filed, and we set up an installment agreement that the IRS agreed to. But here's the thing, you can't have a properly set up payment plan with all years if the IRS has not received at least your past 6 years. So we're looking at this tax return. They've been filing each year. They haven't owed anymore. They're sending their monthly payments. And then all of a sudden we get a notice saying like, hey, we never received this return. And I'm like, how have you never received that return? Like, I talked to somebody on the phone, gave financials. We have that amount in there. I've been apologized to by the IRS multiple times about this one case because they see the return there. They requested my client to verify their identity. They haven't noted that that is done, and they still have not processed the return yet. So it's something that I have to keep calling and checking up on. It's not complex. The different people I'm talking to in different departments say this should be really simple. We'll get right back to you. But guess what? It's 2 years later, and this $24,000, for lack of a better word, as people say, is going to be the death of me. Whereas I had somebody this spring, they owed $105,000. I got their information. I was probably on the phone with them for about an hour, on the phone with the IRS for 30 minutes, and it was all taken care of. So we always start with what we call the transcript investigation, that phase when I come on as the power of attorney, because here's the thing, if taxes aren't your thing, you remember growing up, you played that game telephone where you'd be in a circle and you tell one person and it just got down.
Yeah.
Taxpayers, whether it is malicious or not, don't always relay the message from the IRS exactly as what it is. So when I come on as a power of attorney, I have a process where I pull the transcripts and I actually speak to the IRS because I want to see if your story matches up with what the IRS has. And that's not to say that the taxpayer is incorrect, because I've been able to find errors of the IRS just by looking at the transcripts, because what we have to remember is the IRS is comprised of humans. So they make mistakes as well. But now as the advocate, it's my responsibility to point out that mistake to protect my client, right? So I've had people where just after a transcript review, I can go call the IRS and we get something taken care of. But in that analysis, I get the breakdown of penalties, the actual tax and interest, and I see if anything is missing. So if we have tax returns, like I mentioned earlier, the last 6 have to be filed before we can negotiate. I find all that information out. If I need to request a hold on the account, cool. I have a call with my client and say, okay, for these 3 years you filed late, that's $11,000 of your balance, this penalty. What happened these years? Because I'm analyzing, okay, do we have something that is going to satisfy the IRS where we can request abatement of this penalty, which just means they're going to forgive it. And once that's forgiven, if there's no balance, the client will get a check back. If there's a balance, that amount they'll credit to the account. If there are returns missing, I'm getting the wage and income transcript from the IRS so we can file those returns. Now we're in a position to actually negotiate. Skipping any of those steps messes up the process. And sometimes I've been left with egg on my face. It's like, oh, the client told me one thing. It's like, well, it's right here in the transcripts. So with us complex or simple. Can't really judge those tax cases by their cover, right?
No.
So everybody goes through the same process just to ensure that we're giving them the best service and that we're actually doing everything that we can to reduce the penalties and the amount that they have to pay as much as we can.
That's awesome. Now, what are some proactive steps that a consumer can start taking, at least minimize some of the damage, of a potential tax lien or a tax situation? What are some proactive things that you would recommend consumers to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they are a business owner, keep up with your books throughout the year. Because what happens when we rush during tax time, mistakes are made. And in addition to mistakes being made, it doesn't always get filed on time. So, as I mentioned earlier with the penalties, two of the biggest penalties we look at are the accuracy related penalty. And that's where there's an understatement of income. Now, this can be because maybe you're a business owner and a 1099 got left off, or maybe you claimed a deduction or credit that you didn't actually qualify for. So if this makes up, let's say this deduction, it reduced your tax liability by $3,000, right? But your total liability was only 10. What the IRS says is, okay, you reduced your liability by more than 20%. So not only are we going to assess this additional tax, we're going to assess you this accuracy related penalty for negligence for messing this up. This is something that I also try to warn people about. And this is actually relevant to you, not you specifically, but your industry. If you are trying to buy a home, don't not put your deductions to qualify for more. Because for one, it's mortgage fraud. But then two, the IRS is going to come back with a fine-tooth comb because they're slow, not stupid as an organization. Say, okay, so what else have you been lying about? All of a sudden, you have all of these deductions to reduce your tax liability when you didn't have any. So again, we're looking at an accuracy related penalty because we just significantly decreased the liability and it looks like you made stuff up, right? So we have that. And then a simple one for people to avoid is the failure to file penalty. If you filed an extension this past tax season, you have until 10/15. I don't care what the balance is, make sure that gets in by 10/15. The reason for that, for each month that your return is late as an individual, the IRS assesses you a failure to file penalty. That's 5% of whatever the balance is. So again, using the number 10,000, right? If that's what your balance is, the IRS can hit you with the failure to file penalty for 5 months for a grand total of 25% of your liability. So now we have a tax liability of $12,500 and $2,500 of that's just a failure to file penalty because you didn't file on time.
Right.
That, in my humble opinion, is a silly reason to get slapped with a penalty. But what happens is people see the balance and they do like the ostrich, right? They put their head in the sand. They're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. If nothing else, file the return ASAP. Those are two penalties that are, again, I would say easy in theory to avoid. Make sure your return is filed on time. Make sure if you're a business owner, you're keeping up with your books so that you're not rushing during tax time that can get filed on time. And then as W-2 earners, make sure you're keeping track of all of your tax documents. Something else that can lead to like an accuracy related penalty, depending on what the liability is. A very common mistake I see is people with HSA accounts. They get the form for the distribution they made, but they don't turn it into their tax professional. So yes, your HSA funds, when you make a withdrawal, if you use them for qualified medical expenses, they're not taxed. However, if you don't put them on the return in the first place, and the IRS sees from a third party that form went out, they treat it as income, which means they're going to tax it. And then in addition to that, you're paying a 20% penalty. And then, depending on how much it made your tax liability go up, you may be assessed with an accuracy-related penalty. So these are proactive things that everybody can do and file on time and keeping track of your stuff throughout the year. And in the spring for our W-2 earners.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it's great information to know. And as we wrap up, I'm just curious on the future of like tax law. I mean, does it change based on presidency and who's in the office, or, what do you see the future of tax law and where are we going? Is it going to get tighter? Is it going to be more strict? I mean, what do you foresee?
I foresee it is going to have to be stricter because all of the money that went out during the pandemic. But what I can tell you, even if we didn't have a pandemic, again, going back to 2017 is when the Tax Cut and Job Act was passed. 2018, it went into effect. So 2019 was the first year we filed where we actually felt the effect. That's set to sunset in 2025, which just means that it's going to expire. So as I mentioned before, there are people, especially if you just became an adult in this pandemic or just became a parent, it feels like you can't get a grasp of what's really going on. If Congress does not do anything to extend the TCJA, everything is going to go back after December 31st of 2025. Now, because of businesses that were started, and there are a lot of credits and deductions for business owners, the corporate tax rate went down to 21% from 35%. I don't think they're going to let everything expire, but how they will do that and still make up for everything that went out during the pandemic, I'm not sure. One thing that I will say, though, is the IRS does put out a newsletter. And yes, I am going to put this out there. I think you should follow me on YouTube if you're watching this and you don't understand tax law. Because again, if you understood tax law as well as I did, you should be doing what I'm doing. And I think what a lot of people in Congress and even tax professionals, they don't think of, I call it tax and ease. It's a completely different language in and of itself. And I do break down new tax concepts and things as they come out on the channel. Now, a lot of it does surround tax relief, but there are preventative things on there as well. For example, how to make those estimated tax payments and handle your W-4. So each year when those are adjusted, I update that. If we're coming in with a storm and the Tax Cut and Job Act is going to be expiring, I will definitely be covering that, trying to give people that heads up, because I don't want people to become my representation clients, right? That's a horrible situation for anybody to be in.
Oh, I appreciate that. Timalyn, let's get your contact information.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody is interested in listening to the podcast, Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens is actually streaming on all podcast networks. On YouTube, you can find me at America's Fave EA. I'm also on social media as America's Fave EA or as Timalyn S. Bowens. But if you have a tax situation that is, burdening you right now and you would like to do a 15-minute discovery call, you can book that appointment at www.bowens, BOWENS, taxsolutions.com.
Timalyn, that was great information. I really appreciate you coming on the show today, and I want you to have an epic day.
Thank you.
Take care.
That have chosen a path. The who's, the whys,